Hey, welcome to Wisdom Wednesday with Pastor Josh. Wisdom is the quality or state of being wise, as knowledge of what is true, right, coupled with just judgment as to action, sagacity, discernment, and insight. We're going to look at what that means today on this edition of Wisdom Wednesday. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast today as we continue the book Unoffendable by Brant Hansen. I encourage you to pick up a copy if you haven't already. We're coming to the end of it here, and we're in chapter 23. And it's entitled, Forget Danish People. That's what we talked about yesterday. Let's talk about your elbow. And so he talks about the elbow and how, when you smack your elbow and it gets, and it really begins to hurt, it's because it's inflamed. And so he talks about Timothy Keller a little bit. He says, Timothy Keller uses the idea of favoring an inflamed joint to make a great point. This is precisely how the human ego works. It hurts when it's inflamed. Sure, it's always there. Everyone's got an ego, but when it's oversized, it's constantly being injured or threatened. When it's all about me, I'm constantly aware of myself, bracing myself for ego injury. Real humility isn't putting yourself down or pretending your performance is substandard to everything you try. Real humility lies in self-forgetfulness. Few want to hear this, but it's true, and it can be enormously helpful in life. If you're constantly being hurt, offended, or angered, you should honestly evaluate your inflamed ego. When you're humble, you're not constantly thinking, how do I look? Or am I a success? Or what do they think of me? And so that's a challenge right there, I have to be honest. I've been there. I've struggled with that. It's a hard thing. He says Christians are especially good at wrapping our significance in Christian terms and ministry terms to avoid the impression that we're self-centered. Oh my goodness, that's a hard one, isn't it? So he really starts to dial down on some of the real motives to why we're so offended. And man, these hurt. He's been talking about pride quite a bit and how pride really makes a difference. When we're prideful, when we let our ego, like he's talking about today, when we let our ego be inflamed, when we are not doing well in self-forgetfulness, we really struggle. We really struggle to be unoffendable. We want to be offended because we feel like we have a right to be. And we've talked about that at the very beginning of the book. And so he really makes a case that we have to be careful about this, that we cannot let our ego get away from us. And so C.S. Lewis talks about humility, and he says it this way. He says, to even get near humility for even a moment is like a drink of cold water to a man in the desert. Do not imagine that if you meet a really humble man, he will be what most people call humble nowadays. He will not be a sort of greasy, smarmy person. That's a funny word, smarmy. But who is always telling you that, of course, he is nobody. Probably all of you will think about him is that he seemed a cheerful, intelligent chap who really took a real interest in what you said to him. If you dislike him, it will be because you feel like a little envious of anyone who seems to enjoy life so easily. He will not be thinking about humility. He will not be thinking about himself at all. And then Brant goes on to say that when we choose ahead of time, before conversations, before meetings, before our day begins, to be unoffendable, we're simply choosing humility. He shares a story about a guy, Sakarisa Him, a Cambodian man whose story is one of the most horrific he'd ever heard. He'd come from a large family and watched them all die in 1977. They were beat to death right in front of him. They left him for dead. And so his desire was to get even, to bring forth vengeance upon them. And he talks about this remarkable story and how, I think it was in the book, it says, the tears of my soul. It talks about how he became a follower of Jesus. And it says, but one of the most breathtaking aspects of this to me was how he quickly realized he couldn't become a believer in Jesus and remain angry with his family's killers. He realized it was simply incompatible. And so it's wow, what a powerful story, right? He had to lay himself down to be able to pick up the salvation God offered. Bitterness, anger. He knew he had to get rid of them, even in the face of extreme injustice. And then Brant says, self-forgetfulness is what happens when we're emotionally healthy. And that's the truth, is that many times one of the reasons why we're so offendable is that we're not healthy. Spiritually, emotionally, physically sometimes, we're not healthy. If you're being easily offended, there's a good chance that you're off balance, that you are not living a healthy spiritual life. And that's a big deal. And so in this chapter, Brant really talks a lot about that and how we need to look at ourselves and say, man, am I making this all about me? Maybe it's really not all about me. And that should affect everything. And so I want to challenge you today. Look at your life. Is it all about you? Is it all about stroking your ego and somehow enlarging and allowing your ego to become inflamed so that it hurts, everything hurts because people are hurting your ego? I would challenge you to lay it down and to let Christ do a work in your life and to allow Him to humble you to the point of real grace, to allow Him to show His grace in your life through humility. And I challenge you to do that this week. Thanks for joining me today. And join us tomorrow for the final chapter of the book Unoffendable by Brant Hansen. Thanks for joining me.